All right, let me go ahead and welcome everyone. Hopefully everybody's got a bite to eat here. I really appreciate you all joining us for today's session, which I'm incredibly excited about, with Rhee and George Parker. Before I introduce them and make them feel a bit embarrassed reading their bios, let me just do some logistical table setting here, which is here on the program on education policy and governance. We have 2 more sessions left in this fall semester. The next one, we're actually taking next week off. So in 2 weeks, on Tuesday, November the 19th, we're going to have a justice from the Arizona Supreme Court to discuss vouchers and kind of address the question of, do they violate federal and state constitutions? So hopefully some of y'all can join us for that on the 19th. I should also introduce myself. I am Payman Rahanafard. I help moderate these sessions. My background is pretty similar to our 2 guests here in that I worked in school districts for a very long time. I started as a teacher in New York City and eventually made my way into the central office there. And I worked in the Bloomberg administration, and eventually, once we got termed out, became a superintendent in New Jersey. So know a little bit about district work, have presented here before, but my role today is to get out of the way and facilitate, hopefully, what I imagine will be an awesome conversation. So without any further ado, let me introduce our guests here, and we'll open it up by essentially having a conversation, and then we're going to welcome in audience questions as we always do. So as I mentioned, we're joined by George Parker and Rhee. George is the senior advisor at the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, an expert on teaching and school governance, and the former president of the Washington, D.C. Teachers Union. He spent 30 years as a math teacher and educator in the District of Columbia Public Schools. And for 6 years, he served as the president of the Teachers Union. And during his tenure, he negotiated a groundbreaking collective bargaining agreement, which we're going to learn a lot about, that implemented innovations in teacher pay, tenure, and transfer policies, professional development, and equity in classroom resources. He subsequently played a major role in design, implementation, and monitoring of the first local school-based shared decision-making model in the district. Rhee is the former chancellor of Washington, D.C. Public Schools, where she served from 2007 to 2010. Under her leadership, the lowest performing school district in the country at that time became the only major city system to see double-digit growth in reading and math scores in 7th and 10th grades over those 3 years. In 2010, Michelle launched Students First, a bipartisan national advocacy organization. Students First has built a state-based movement of over 1.5 million members and has helped pass over 130 policies to elevate the education of 23 million children. She is now CEO of 7 Ventures. She earned her bachelor's degree in government from Cornell and a master's from these hallowed grounds at Kennedy School. Let's welcome the 2 of them to this conversation. So, Michelle, why don't we have you first describe to everyone here in the room the state of DCPS when you first came in, set the stage.
Sure. So, in 2007, at the time that Adrian Prenti was elected mayor and decided that he wanted to take over the school district, DC Public Schools was the lowest performing school district in the nation. It was the only school district in the country that was on high-risk status with the U.S. Department of Education, mostly for the misuse of federal funds. At the time, the statistic was that if you were a 9th grader attending high school in the district, the likelihood that you would graduate from high school and then go on to college and graduate from college within 4 years was 9%. Of all of the 8th graders in the city's schools, only 8% of them were on grade level in mathematics. And that 92% of our young people were not meeting basic standards in math, and yet at the same time, about 98% of our teachers were being rated as doing a great job. And potentially the most disheartening data of them all was about our little ones. Basically what that showed was that when kids came into our system, they generally were on par with other kids who looked like them, not from their suburban counterparts, but other kids who looked like them from cities like, Detroit or Cleveland or Memphis. But the problem was that the longer they stayed in the system, the worse off they were. So by the time they were in the third grade, they were far behind their urban peers. So essentially, what I would often say is like kids in DC at that time were almost better off staying home every day than coming to school, where they were almost certain to fall behind. So that was sort of the state of play. And Adrian Fenty, who at the time was sort of a political nobody. I mean, he was a council member, but nobody really knew who he was. He had a name for himself, and he decided that he was going to run for mayor. But he was running against somebody who had a tremendous amount of political capital, name recognition, et cetera. That person got all of the endorsements, lots of the money, et cetera. But Adrian's strategy was that he was going to go door to door. So urban legend has it that he knocked on half of the doors in Washington, D.C. And what was interesting was that when he won, he was the youngest ever elected mayor of the District of Columbia and the only mayor ever to win every single precinct in the district. So really had a mandate, he felt. And the way that he tells it, he says that it didn't matter where he was in the city. He could be in Chevy Chase, he could be in Anacostia. Everyone, when he sat down in the living room, would repeatedly say, if you're going to lead this city and turn it around, you have to fix the schools. So on his very first day in office, he introduced legislation to the city council that would allow him to take over mayoral control of the schools. So there would be no school board any longer. He would control the schools. He would hire the chancellor, and that person would report directly to him. So he introduced that legislation and then went through about 4 months of this process where he lobbied city council to pass the legislation and allow him to take over control of the schools. I, at the time, was running a national nonprofit organization called the New Teacher Project. We were working with most of the large urban school districts across the country. And so I was at an education conference, and his deputy mayor for education, Victor Reynoso, said, hey, we have to hire a chancellor. We're really close to getting this legislation passed. And all of the superintendents out there. I want to pick your brain about who we should hire. It's like, great. So he takes me out to dinner, sing for my supper, or so I thought. I gave him 4 names of like super solid people who I thought could do the job. And he came up to me the next day and he's like, how about you? And I said, absolutely not. 2 little kids, number one. And I said, number 2 is like, being an urban superintendent is like the worst job in the world. You get blamed for everything. You have the power to do nothing. Like, who would ever want to do that? And he was like, oh, come on. And I was like, absolutely not. And he's like, well, will you at least come and talk to the mayor? And at the time, the New Teacher Project was just about to leave DC public schools. So that gives you a sense of the dysfunction. We were working with all the large urban school districts in the country. So if we were leaving you, that means you were really bad. So I was like, sure, I'd be happy to go and talk to you and tell you about everything. Simultaneously, though, he had just planned a trip up to New York to see Bloomberg and Klein in action. He took the city council up with him. And when he was leaving that trip, he asked Joel Klein, like, hey, who should we hire to be the chancellor? Like, I need somebody like you who's got a ton of drive and is unafraid. And Joel said to him, well, I know who you should hire, but you won't hire her, so it doesn't matter anyways. And Adrian was like, why? He's like, because she's young, she's Korean, it's not going to make any political sense for you to do it. And Adrian said, well, tell me who she is anyways. So it's Michelle Rhee. So Adrian, on his drive back to DC, is calling Victor Reynoso saying, well, who's Michelle Rhee? Joel Klein says we should hire her. And Victor says, well, she's coming in next week to talk to you. So at this time, you have to realize that, like, so the legislation has passed and everyone in DC is trying to figure out, like, who is Adrian Fenty gonna hire? So all the press is camped out in front of City Hall, trying to figure out, like, who's he talking to? So, they have me come and visit him at 11 o'clock at night. They bring me in through the side door of City Hall, so I don't have to sign in. And this aide is like walking me up 4 flights of stairs. And as we're doing this, I say to the guy, you realize that I could walk in and out of this building and sign in 20 times and nobody would ever think that it was because you were talking to me about this job. That's how just out of bounds it was at the time that they would even be considering me. Had a conversation with Adrian, was unbelievably impressed by what he had to say. And then for me, I was just like, you know what? I spend every day like banging my head up against the wall because I'm so frustrated by all these superintendents and the things that I think they should be doing, but they refuse to do. It's like, this is put up or shut up time, right? Like, if you think you have all the answers, girl, go do it. So they offered me a job. I was like, all right, let's go. And that's sort of how I began my journey. I had known about George for a long time because the New Teacher Project had been working with George. I'll tell you about our very first encounter, in-person encounter, which was that in the legislation, it mandated that the mayor had to ensure that the teachers union president at the time met and signed off on his pick for chancellor role. The way that Adrian did this is on the morning of the press conference to announce me as chancellor. He invites George to his office. We come in, he's like, George, Michelle, George, you good? Let's go. We walk down, they introduced me, and that was sort of our very rapid beginning of our relationship, which probably didn't get us off on the best foot. But I think over time, and we can talk a little bit about this, like we quickly formed, I think, a very positive relationship that allowed us to get to the point where we, after 2 years of negotiation, were able to sign what was considered at the time to be a groundbreaking teachers union contract.
It's unclear if that interaction met the letter of the law, but we won't go too far into that. So, George, before we turn the conversation to the collaboration and the work you all did, is there anything you want to add in terms of the political dynamic that Michelle was walking into, as someone who obviously been a part of that system and had known it quite well?
Yeah, well, the political dynamic, I think, for me, well, let me just give you my history. Well, you read it, didn't we? I had 30 years in the classroom. I was a mathematics teacher in DC, middle school and high school. Most of my years were in middle school. I grew up on the farm in North Carolina. It was interesting. I met a kid that was actually from my little town I grew up in. He says his grandparents still live there. It's called Richlands, North Carolina. One of the students in the other class. So I told him, man, really? I was down that way just a couple of weeks ago. But so I grew up on a farm, tobacco, cotton, and all of that. My father was a sharecropper. Education was important to me because having grown up poor, I didn't have a way to get to college, but I knew I wanted to get out of that tobacco field. So I ended up getting I got scholarship to college, academic, et cetera. So when I got into education, I got into it by subbing. I had never planned to be a teacher when I went to college. It was like, don't mention anything like that to me. I majored in math and minored in chemistry. So it's like, I'm going out here and make all this money doing something else that's that's just high tech, right? And that kind of stuff. And my first day when I went in as a sub, I found that I had this connection with kids that was something very unique and different. And I found that I kind of enjoyed it. But as I said in another session though, for anyone that's ever taught school, you know that you don't go in on the first day. And I told the kids they could call me George. Now tell a group of middle school kids they can call their teacher by his first name. I learned that lesson very quickly, not to do that again, right? But having grown up during the civil rights movement, I grew up during Jim Crow, where, you know, we had to go to separate bathrooms than whites. We had a colored and a white and et cetera. And I grew up went to high school in a segregated high school at that time. When I graduated, we had just gotten past, I think North Carolina had finally ended all of its court battles against the 1954 decision, and finally they had to integrate. Uh, so when I got into the classroom, I became a part of the union because I've always been an advocate for something, some people, somebody. I was very active in the union, so I started and got invited on the union contract negotiation team, I think maybe around in 1990. And we had a Board of Education during that whole time. I think I worked on 4 contracts before Michelle came, union contracts. And one of the things that was very important for us as a union was the political connections. We have an elected school board. So within the power of the union, well, it's like it is today in most political pieces, that if you donate funds to certain candidates, you expect those candidates to repay you in favor down the road. So pretty much as a union leader initially, before Michelle came, I was kind of the normal union leader, followed the roles and the directions and the agenda of the national union, or the WTU, the Washington Teachers Union, the AFT. Randy Weingarten, the president, was our national union. So I kind of had the natural union culture of these guys are people we fight, right? It's just, that's just the way it was. You're the union and they're the system, you gotta fight. So we went when Adrian Fenty got elected, and that's when things really changed. As a matter of fact, we supported Fenty going to mayoral control. And that's because I felt like, for the union standpoint, the bureaucracy was too much to get stuff done in a timely fashion. And so I actually embraced the idea of mayoral control, where you got one person that you can talk to, and if you can get that solved, then you're ready to move on. I think one of the biggest things when Michelle came, and in addition to the fact that Adrian kind of fudged on it a little bit, because we actually were supposed to have a voice on whether or not he hired you, but he had already
He
done
asked you
that.
if you were good or not.
Well, it was, yeah, but he had the press already there, and they're gonna ask me if I was good, right? But I was good. I think the biggest challenge for me as a union leader was to move down a path of trying to do the right thing for kids. Now, I don't know if I need to tell that story again of how I got there. Maybe I'll talk about that once we move down the line a little further. But I think one of the things that I'm finding out today is that the agreement that we did negotiate has survived time. That's about 95% of what we put into that agreement is still in there over the last 15 years, which means that they found it to be very useful.
Let's get into that then. Let's talk about the agreement.
Okay.
Let's talk about the collaboration and sort of maybe call out the tenets of the groundbreaking collective bargaining agreement that you all brokered. And as part of you telling that story, we know Michelle was going to get backlash, but perhaps George, you could also talk about to what extent you felt any backlash from the union rank and file, and sort of what that looked like or felt like during that whole process.
That's a good one. Yeah, I got my own pushback, both from the members and even from my internal organization. My general vice president and I were on different stages on this, because I was kind of a reformer. He was a traditional union guy. I think the biggest pushback for me was setting a new culture. And I'll tell the story about how I set that, because I was a strong union guy, right? There was no teacher that deserved to be fired, right? I mean, that's the whole concept. If you're a union guy, it's that you're not about the business of firing teachers, or at least that was the culture, right? So the biggest thing for me, first of all, was to change my own philosophy and attitude about change, which was difficult to do given the union's culture. So usually it's just we're fighting. Um, I remember when I made the change and the difference. I went out to a local school one day, and there was a career day, and I was speaking to a group of third graders. And they would ask, what did I do as a union president? So I said, I make sure teachers have the kind of resources that they need in order to give you a good education. I make sure you have the best teachers, and I make sure that your teachers are treated fairly. And when I finished, this little girl, about 8 years old, right? She comes up and she just hugs me innocently. And I'm kind of wondering, what is this, right? So I asked her, I said, baby, why did you hug me? And she said, because you said you care about us and that you make sure we have the best teachers. And so when I was driving back to the office, I had what Oprah called an aha moment, right? And my aha moment was that I said to myself, you lied to that little girl. You told her that you care about her and you make sure she has the best teachers, but you just spent $10,000 on an arbitration case to put a bad teacher right back in the classroom. A teacher that you knew you wouldn't even let get near your granddaughter, period. And so I had that aha moment of, this little girl was you. She was poor. She came from a low income neighborhood. Education was her only opportunity to even take a shot at the American dream, and you're lying to her. And so I had that aha moment that as a union leader and following the regular union culture of we are against the administration, it's a back and forth fight. I had to make a decision whether or not I was going to follow the regular union culture, or was I going to do what's best for children like that little girl who was like me. Education was my only effort or my only opportunity to leave to exit poverty, unless I was going to hit the lottery or something. There was no lottery back then. So I had this voice in this conversation with myself and decided I needed to do something to help children. And I think Michelle's coming to the city helped to move me there because, as I said to you earlier, that I used to have a board of education. So politically, I was able to use the Board of Education because, of course, we'd always make sure that we funded the campaigns for over half of the board as a union. So therefore, if I fund over half of your members on the board, if you have, I can't remember now, we had 9 or 11, I don't know, I can't remember now. But anyway, it was an odd number, so we had one over half. So pretty much I could block anything that the then superintendent wanted to do by calling the board members and say, look, we supported you. We helped to make your campaign a success. But we don't want this on the negotiating table. And when the superintendent or chancellor brings it, we want it off. And I could get it done. But once we went to mayoral control, I had one person to talk to when she brought something to the table that I didn't want to do. And that was the mayor. And so when she came to the table with all of the new stuff she wanted, it's like, okay, let's have a conversation with the mayor because she's coming in here with stuff that we just aren't going to do. Or at least we're not used to doing it. I went in and had a conversation with the mayor, and the mayor said, she is my chancellor. I'm going to back her up 100%. So now I'm left in a situation where I don't have a school board. That's my political power. City council has no say so anymore. It's the mayor. That's another loss to my political power. The only person I can go to when she's acting up is the mayor. And he's told me he stands behind her all the way. Now, So what all of that did was help drive me though, which when I think back on it, is probably the best thing that ever happened to me in terms of benefiting kids. Because for the first time, I had to actually negotiate. When I say negotiate, I don't mean surface stuff, which is what we normally did, right? Superintendent come to the table, he knew, don't bring up anything about teacher transfers. Don't bring up anything about seniority or any of that, or don't bring up anything about teacher evaluation. We're not talking about it. All of a sudden, she comes with all of it, right? Bad teachers, we ought to fire 'em. Teacher transfer part, right? We don't need seniority. We need the best teachers. So here she comes with all of this stuff, and I'm sitting here. It's like, wow, I have to have a different mindset to deal with this, and it forced me to because I couldn't play politics because I lost all of that. Right, with the board gone and this council has no power, and so that coupled with the conversation with the little girl just brought me back to a reality that I really was a union president that was just following union culture, but wasn't doing anything to help kids. And a little girl like that was going to he was going to slip through the crack. And my teachers didn't lie to me and cause me to slip through the crack. So I said, I have to make a decision to deal with educational issues. And I talked to my pastor about it because I knew the blowback was going to be tough. If you're a union leader and you start talking about seniority, you start talking about performance pay, you're getting ready to get some pushback from your fellow union leaders. And I got a lot of pushback. I mean, across the country when we started talking about performance pay and et cetera. There was some nights when it was like, I don't know if this is worth it, right? Because, you lose friends. I was losing friends that have been friends of mine, other union presidents for I don't know how long, man. And all of a sudden, because of something that I want to do for kids, it's like, don't do this. So when I'm saying we're going to do performance pay, it's like, don't do it because if you go, they're going to come for us too. And but I ended up doing it. Even Randy Weingarten, who was the AFT president, said I shouldn't do it. It was just something I believed in. But I'm saying I had to first build enough courage to deal with the backlash that I was going to get from other union leaders, but then also the backlash that I would get from my members. The minute you start talking about seniority, seniority normally was the basis if you had to let someone go, right? And it was good. It was needed because I grew up under Jim Crow, which meant that there was no fair system whenever a company had to let people go. If you were Black, you were the first, no matter how good you were performing. So seniority was a great data-driven way of saying, no, we're going to cut out the racial inequity here, and that if we have to let someone go, we'll use a data-driven record, and that'll be who came last. That's the person. But realistically, at that point in education, how long you've been working should not be the purpose, the main determining factor, because how long you've been teaching has nothing to do with how well you've been teaching, how well and how good you are at the job. And so at some point, I felt that what she was saying was correct. The question was, did I have the courage? Was I willing to take the blowback to step out there with performance pay, to step out there with seniority not being the driving factor, and et cetera? And once I had that aha moment with myself and decided, okay, you're going to take some errors. You're going to take some in the front, but you're going to take some in the back too. And had the courage to say, I'm going to do this, then we really did some good negotiating. Now, I lost my next election. So I don't know, the two could be very well connected. And I didn't win the next election, but I did we got the contract done. And I today feel proud of that because I think it was something that worked out very well for kids.
So appreciate you sharing that story. And so your aha moment driven by your conscience, plus the sort of political dynamics, the city council and the board and the mayor's support of Michelle. So really helpful to kind of tell this story. Michelle, let's pull you in. Can you just talk about the broad strokes of what this agreement accomplished and connect it to sort of, and George, you've already touched on this, but the longer term impact and sort of what's been sustained?
Sure. So there were a number of things that we put in place. And just as a sort of a little bit of context, the very first time that George and I met about the contract. So the contract had run out before I even got there. So we were operating without a contract. We knew that we had to negotiate. So he let me get my bearings for a few weeks, and then we decided to meet. It was on a Sunday afternoon at the district office. He thought I was trying to sweat him out. I did not realize at the time that the air conditioning did not run on the weekends. So it was just super hot, and we're just sitting there fine. So he comes like guns a-blazing in. He's like, I know what you're all about. I've read all your stuff. I know what you're going to ask for. I'm just here to tell you it's going to cost you. He's like, we have the lowest paid teachers in the region, but I think our teachers are the hardest working. They have the most difficult job, so they should be the highest paid teachers in the tri-state area. And I was like, I'm with you on that. Let's go. And so from the beginning, we were aligned on wanting to take our teachers from being the lowest paid to the highest paid. And over time, there were sort of a number of interactions between us that made us understand that like there were fundamental things that we agreed on. And that allowed us to build trust in the relationship. But going back to the contract and sort of what we negotiated, so a few things that George alluded to. One, we essentially got rid of most if not all, right, of the seniority provisions. So in DCPS prior to this contract, for example, if teacher transfers, right? If you were a senior teacher and you wanted to transfer to another school and you had seniority, like, that's what ruled the day. We put in place something called mutual consent, which is that the teacher wanted to go, but the principal had to say, yes, we want this person here. That was not the case before. So we put mutual consent in place. That was one. 2, layoffs would be done by quality, not seniority. That one was a tough one. But probably sort of the most controversial things were that we put in place a teacher evaluation system that, one, allowed us to remove ineffective teachers from the classroom. I know that sounds obvious, but it did not happen. And still to this day in many school districts still does not happen. And on the flip side of that, it allowed us to pay effective teachers a lot more money. So essentially we put in place a structure whereby if you were a high performing teacher in a low performing school in a high needs subject area, you could essentially make double in the new contract what you did in the old contract. So you could be a 3rd year teacher and be making up to 6 figures, which back then was like unheard of. And so we had architected sort of these general structures. And what George was very clear about is like, look, we have a teaching force of people who like, they did not come in with these expectations. And so part of the negotiation was that we would allow current teachers to choose. They could either stay on the old way of getting paid, or they could move to the new system of getting paid. When they moved over to that system, they knew they were giving up their seniority, tenure, et cetera, but the possibility of making a whole lot of money was there. And so we, perhaps mistakenly, dubbed the system so that like red track was you want to stay where you are, and the green track was you want to move to this new system. And so what we said was anyone who is currently working for the system who wants to adopt the new compensation, the green track, can do so. If you want to stay on the red track, you can do that. And all new teachers coming into the system would be on the green track. So we had all this laid out. We had established this plan for how we were going to roll it out. And we had all these teacher meetings set up. We were gonna go school to school. It was gonna be these open sessions. They had this presentation. They could ask us whatever questions they wanted. So we had all this planned out. And the weekend before we started those sessions, uh, somebody in his organization leaked it to the press. So the press wrote this scathing article, basically like, here's what they're gonna do. And of course, it didn't have any of our framing or whatnot. So we went into those first sessions and just got pummeled because the teachers were like, oh, we see what you're trying to do. You're trying to get rid of veteran teachers and fire all of us so you can bring in these, new teachers who cost a lot less money, et cetera. And so we just got our heads handed to us. And I don't think we ever really were able to catch up from that, even though we ended up getting the contract passed and all that sort of stuff. That was one of the toughest things that happened was we just got started in a deficit.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
So talk a little bit about George, you mentioned like 95% of it is sort of in place. Talk a little bit about the long-term impact, either of you.
Well, I think initially it was shock, I think one of the things, and the contract itself, well, first of all, let me say that the good thing about the contract, and I think the money helped too in that sense. When we had with the union contract, your teachers ultimately, even when I and Michelle may agree, it has to be a tentative contract because on the labor law with the unions, teachers must have an opportunity to vote on the contract. And one of the good things about it, and I think that came from some of the sessions we had, we explained it well enough to teachers and the reasons why it was possible. 80% of the teachers who voted in favor of it. So that was very good. But the contract, now this was what, about 15 years ago, maybe 14, 95% of the contract is still solid, which means that they felt that it's a pretty good, there's not a lot left to be done except implement, right? Of course, that depends upon the fidelity of those who are implementing. But I think one of the biggest, hardest things for us to do for me, was to get outside support. Like Randy Weingarten got involved with the negotiation. I don't think Randy trusted me. She thought I'd give the store away, really. She never told me that, but I think that's why she got involved. But I wasn't gonna give the store away, but I did want students to learn, and it was time for change. But I think one of the areas probably that I did not do a very good job was changing the culture of teachers where they could accept the changes at the time. We'd expressed the contract. The thing that I didn't do was get my teachers to the point where they were culturally ready for it. So I think some of that was my failure to understand I needed to get the culture right for teachers to accept change of such a magnitude. That might be why I didn't win the next election. But I think that overall, we did a great job with it. And it was time to move on, or at least others thought it was time.
Yeah, and it worked,
Yeah, it
bottom
worked.
line. Like, we went from, I said, being the lowest performing school district in the nation to leading the nation in academic gains, according to the NAEP exam, which is the gold standard exam. And the fact that DC was continually DC public schools was continually outpacing the nation, seeing gains in reading and math scores far beyond when we left, when both of us left office. That trend continued through the pandemic.
I could keep going, but I think now would be a good time as any to pull in other audience members. Let's start with you, sir, and then.
I was curious more about the specifics of the performance, like firing-based measures. Was that like the most was it like sort of like a percentage of like the 5% most ineffective teachers will get fired every year, no matter what? Was it based on like student performance on standardized exams? Like, I'm curious or I'm curious to hear more about what went into that specific part of the contract.
Yeah, there was never anything around like the bottom X would be fired or anything like that. It was based on a few things. So one thing, and this was the most controversial thing, was based on student growth metrics. And I know for a lot of people, you're like, of course, teachers should be evaluated based on student growth, but that was actually unheard of at the time. Teacher evaluation back in those days was like somebody coming in for 3 minutes, looking at your classroom, checking a whole bunch of boxes and moving on. Right. So the idea that your effectiveness in the classroom was part of that was very unusual. So that was a lot of the teacher's evaluation was based on that. We also had school-wide achievement levels because we wanted people both to do well individually, but feel like they were part of a team. And then we had the evaluations of their performance in the classroom through observations. And one of the things that we put in place was we talked to a lot of teachers who said, look, I'm a teacher who teaches 3-year-old autistic kids. My principal taught high school PE. He knows nothing about what my practice is every day. And so we instituted a program called the Master Educator Program, where 3 of the 5 evaluations were done by somebody who was an expert in your grade level and subject area, not in the school politics, right? So your observations were a piece of that, and then what we called contributions to school community. So people who were, sponsoring the debate team and the soccer team and, sort of going above and beyond. We wanted that to count towards the teacher's evaluation as well. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that when we set those metrics up at the beginning, like we didn't know. Should the growth measures be 20%, 50%, 70%, right? We didn't know. And we were having a hard time because all of these people were willing to help us when it came to like thinking about the various measures and metrics. But when we actually had to decide, then everybody sort of, what the kids now would say, like ghosted us, right? Like nobody's returning our phone calls. One person who was willing to engage with us on this was Tom Kane, who was one of my professors here at the Kennedy School, and then he went over to the Ed School. And he was like, all right, I'll help with this. So we sort of set these percentages, and over time that changed, right? Because our thought was like we're putting a stake in the ground here, but we don't know if this is right or not. And so some things changed over time, where, for example, they started instituting a piece of the growth measure could be based on metrics that the teachers themselves, right, had sort of were like, hey, my MAP test scores or what have you, like these should count as well, not just the state test. So they did change over time, but I think the fundamental sort of basics of it remain the same.
So I want to zoom out a little bit and ask you both a particular question about something that you said roughly 15 years ago when Frontline did the documentary on reforming the DC school system. So for you, Michelle, I think the question sets up quite nicely because it's election day, and it was the quote where you said, I'm not running this school district as a democracy. And I think there's a lot there, and I'd be curious to hear you unpack that in light of sort of the landscape of education reform today and how you think about the tension between the constraints of democracy and trying to improve schools. And for George, I'm really interested in something you said in the documentary when you said that not every teacher is going to be a LeBron James or a Michael Jordan. And so we can't do teacher policy based on just trying to hire those top performers or find them out there, and we have to improve the talent. 15 years later, how do you see that issue playing out?
It's always tough when people bring back my old quotes. I mean, the reality is that I did not like Adrian Fenty's big thing to me always was like 100 miles an hour. We got to go 100 miles an hour. Every one-on-one meeting that we'd have, he'd open it up. Chancellor, are you going 100 miles an hour? Yes, sir. And so I'll just tell a quick story. Early on in my tenure, one of the hardest things that I did was we decided to close schools. And not just a couple of schools, it was 15% of the schools in the district. And if you want to quickly become one of the most unpopular people in the city, all you need to do is say you're closing one school, much less like 27 schools, which is what we're doing. So I got a lot of heat on that. And lots of the sort of first protests were all about the school closings. I came here actually to the Kennedy School to give a talk. And a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, I just wanted you to know that I was part of a school system who did school closures exactly the opposite of how you did it. We had a 2-year-long process. We had all of these committees the committees would determine the criteria, and then everybody would, weigh in and vote and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, and then 2 years later, once we went through this process, we announced which schools were going to be closed. She's like, and everyone went ballistic, including the people who had been involved in the process. She's like, so I'm calling all those people, like, what are you talking about? You were part of this process for minutes. They were like, yeah, that's before I knew that it was going to mean that our school closed. And so, like, through that experience, I will say that, and many others that I had, it's, if you try to please everyone, try to get everyone to agree on something, you are never going to make any changes. That's just the reality, because everybody's got different opinions, right? Could I have done a better job of trying to bring people along? Sure. Kamon did it in Camden. That was not my strength. But the idea that, you can make these tough decisions and make these incredibly dramatic changes and do it in a democratic way, I just didn't feel like that was doable. That's the reality. All right.
That made me just think about one of my most challenging moments. Oh my God, my members went berserk. You remember the cover of Time magazine? They had Michelle standing on cover of Time magazine. Like, I'm trying to calm teachers down, right? Because teachers are thinking, this lady's talking about firing us. So she's on the cover of Time magazine. It's a black outfit, right? With a broom. I can't tell you how many calls I got from teachers. We told you she just want to fire all of us. It's like, just sweep them out. Oh, boy, you talking about. So they had nothing even to do with contract negotiations. This was just, boy, teachers saw that picture and it was like, I tried to say, no, she's not trying to fire everybody, buddy. I had a rough week that week. You remember that picture? I wish you had a copy of it so everybody could see it. It was like, we just gonna sweep teachers out. And they felt that way.
Did you want to add anything to the LeBron and James and Michael Jordan comment?
Well, I think the concept was that every classroom or every school has some superstars. But overall, it's just like basketball. I mean, you got Steph Curry, you got LeBron, but then you got support players. Same thing with the classroom. We don't have enough teachers that all of them are superstars. But you do have superstars. And if you use those superstars effectively, they can help the other team players like LeBron. He got some other good players, and they can win a championship. So as my theory there was that it's the same thing with teachers, that we're not going to be able to develop a system of all LeBron Jameses in every classroom. There just aren't enough of them. But you can have great support players, right, that they can learn from the lead, from the star, and you can still have a championship at your school where your kids are performing. So the key is not that super teacher, because that super teacher pretty much has been gifted, just like LeBron. I mean, I'm not LeBron. I couldn't be LeBron. But most athletes are like me, right? We play for fun and et cetera. most teachers have average talent or above average. You don't have the superstars. So you got to develop a system where those average players can be successful.
You really brought that analogy home. All right, let's go over here.
Thank you both for being here today. My question is informed by my experience teaching high school in DC for 5 years.
Where'd you teach?
E.L. Haynes and Pebble.
Okay,
Oh, wow.
Neil Haynes, okay.
So my question is, like, in theory and ideally, charters exist in part because they can help innovate um, uh, ex- learning experiences for students and drive results. My question is related to the role of charter boards. You know, in talking to colleagues, more often than not, it feels as if both from a value proposition perspective in terms of how charters compensate teachers and how they devise learning experiences for students, it's hard to differentiate what they're offering families compared to the traditional public school down the block. And I'm really curious to get your perspective on what ideally you would love to see charter boards doing to incentivize or encourage charters to lean a little bit more into a pay for performance model or into actually differentiating what they're offering families relative to the traditional public school in the same neighborhood.
I know this is public, so this won't be so popular amongst many people, but I'll say it anyways. I think the charter movement, a lot of sectors of the charter movement have lost their way. The original viewpoint of charter schools was, you're gonna give us a charter for 5 years, right? We are gonna be expected to perform. If we don't perform, we should get our charter revoked, right? So it was all about accountability and really a lot about, like, to your point, like providing an option for families that like looks very different, as a different value proposition to them. And I think that many charter schools these days are just replicating like the dysfunction of the traditional public schools. Not all. I think there are some absolute standouts out there, but there are probably too many that are just replicating like not great practices. So I think that's got to change. I think it will change. We had this experience when we negotiated this contract. So the charter and choice folks were very excited when I came to town because despite being a Democrat, I was a strong choice advocate, like vouchers, charters, all of it. So they were super happy. And, I was very clear about, giving charters access to district school buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would talk to charter advocates all the time and say, like, yes, it's so great having you here because you care, you understand that competition lifts all boats, right? So then we pass this teachers union contract and all of a sudden our DC public school teachers are gonna make a ton more money. One of the first calls I get is from charter advocates who are like, wait. Like, we have a bunch of teachers, our best teachers who are calling us and telling us they're gonna leave to go to DCPS next year. And you have to understand, Michelle, like, we've invested so much in these people. And I'm like, excuse me? So when you had the competitive advantage, then like competition was a good thing. And now that we have the competitive advantage, now you wanna have like a standardized compensation? No, jokers. That's not how this works, right? And so it wasn't until like when we became competitive, that's when like all their, thoughts about competition changed. Which I think brings us back to the point. It's like, what is the purpose, right? But I do think that after the pandemic, people's views on schooling changed a tremendous amount. For a variety of reasons. I think there are all these pressures on the system right now, and these policy changes in terms of ESA dollars, et cetera. And more families are realizing that they want options, whether it's within the traditional public schools, outside, micro schools, charter schools, et cetera. And so I think now is an incredibly unique time where I think there will shortly be an explosion of options, and that people are gonna have to think really carefully about how they structure their programming in ways that are going to be compelling to families. And I think that that can be done through these outside mechanisms, but I think that there are also ways that that can be done within traditional public schools as well.
I want to just add a touch on that, talking about charters. Because right now, I work as a consultant, as a senior advisor for the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. Now, one of the things that is good about charters, we got data now that shows that charter students overall outperforming traditional public school students on standardized tests. I think one of the weak areas, I love charters. I got to say I was anti-charter initially as a union president. In fact, I helped write some of the talking points against charters. But I evolved because I think it's not necessarily whether it's a charter or not, but I think choice is so important, especially in a lot of urban underserved kids. When you limit them to strictly one school, right? We are assigned by, you live in this particular zone, so your school has to do with where you live as opposed to what are your interests or what is your talent. I think I like charter schools, and I support them now 100% because I've seen how they can make a difference. And it's all about the freedom to make a choice. Traditional public schools, like in DC, when I was union president initially, we had maybe 140 schools. Right.
144.
Huh?
144.
Yeah. When you're trying to, the best ideal I can get is that if you're at a hotel that's got 144 rooms and you got one that's got 44 rooms, which one are you going to clean first? The 44 one, you can clean it and do something else with it. Traditional public schools, the structure is not designed for efficiency. It's designed for the average, right? It's just like in most classrooms. If you teach, you really teach to the center, because it's impossible for you to take 30 kids and individualize their education in 45 minutes. You're just not going to do it effectively, right? So, but charters, they're so much easier, and you can innovate. The one thing that impresses me about charters, the innovation. You can innovate without having to get the approval of the bureaucracy, because bureaucracy can hold a lot of stuff up. So I really like the charter school concept. The one problem that I see, and they don't always take my advice, so that's fine, but is that because, education is a state thing. In different states, when you're dealing with getting charter laws, each state has its own law. And some of them monitor charters very effectively, but some of them don't. So that's where you were saying sometimes they're going down the wrong path. It's all dependent upon what the state laws. And so the Alliance has been spending a lot of time first starting with state laws, right, to get it in. Because one of the things that I have been saying is that I love the charter school movement, right? But you have to have accountability. For the charter school movement, their solution to you not being successful is shut you down, which is kind of okay. However, you can't build and develop a district when you only got two options. Either you got to win the championship, or you're not in the league anymore. You get shut down. The weakness of charters is that the system itself, because it's in so many different states, doesn't have a strong support system for charters. Right? In other words, if you got a school that's failing, how do you intervene to keep it from failing? Because if we're going to let them fail, we might as well keep the regular traditional system. We let those schools fail. We come in with different things, but they fail. My thing with the charters is that I haven't yet seen a structure in the movement, state by state, that actually give the charters the kind of support they would need. If you got a principal who can't cut it, do you have to fire the principal? Are there some support services and tutoring and mentoring that you can give to help them make that school a better school? So that's the one weakness I see in the charter movement. It hasn't the states don't have a structure for supporting charters in the same way it does for supporting traditional public schools. Even budgetarily, charters for the most part get anywhere from half to slightly a little more, but they don't get the same dollars that traditional public schools. So that's why you will find that a lot of charter schools don't have athletic programs. They don't get the funds to support those kind of things. But overall, in terms of educational quality, we've done quite a few tests of results now, and charter students are outperforming traditional public school students. But they do have a weakness in that area that they don't have that support. The traditional public schools, we don't try some of everything, from bringing in additional principals or whatever. So, but I do think charter schools is a great way of going for the future because they can adapt themselves to the individual needs of the students in that particular school. And it offers choice. But more than that, I mean, we got choice in terms of what tennis shoes we buy, right? So why shouldn't a public education, the most important thing you got is your child's education, and folks are telling you, no, you have to go to a verdict elementary school unless you get special permission, they send your child somewhere else. Why shouldn't you have options? So charters provide options.
Let's pull in another question.
George and Michelle, I'm really happy to see that the way you both invested your time to see the change happen and your mayor invested money. Both of your money and the time played huge difference in the system. But I'm curious to know, was that only input that you provided to uplift the district that was low performing to become now leading district in the state or in the country? Because during our policy class, we have read some research that shows like even countries like Indonesia or California, where teachers' salary were double, but it doesn't have long-lasting impact on students' outcomes. There was impact, but like short-term impact. But looking at you and listening to your experience, it looked like you invested a lot, like doubling the salary of teachers, and a long-lasting impact. So I'm curious to know what were other input apart from improving the salary to see that long-lasting impact, or was that only input that you provided? Just say giving them good salary, better salary, and they just start performing well.
No, I think the salaries were one piece of it. To George's point about charter schools, like with any system, money is one thing, but you have to have the accountability. So there was an ongoing teacher evaluation system, right? That was another piece. But and a lot of this work happened actually after we left office, but there was a lot of incredible work that my successor Kaya Henderson did with her team on like the curricular work, right? The actual teaching and learning framework. And then one of the things that people don't talk about a lot is the supports that we provided for teachers and their professional development. So, people ask me all the time, like, what's the silver bullet solution to, making everything better? Like, people need to stop talking about that, at least as it pertains to public education, right? You're not gonna have 100% solution. You're more likely gonna have 52% solutions that all have to work in concert to get a district to where it needs to be.
Let me ask one final question. What are you most proud of? What would you have done differently?
Wow. Doesn't have to be one thing.
Ideally, it is, 'cause we're looking at runtime, but.
When you just said, what are you most proud of? It could be more, right? That's interesting. I think one is the pay structure. Because I think that helped recruitment. The fact that teachers were paid at a much better level, because I think education-wise, teachers are so underpaid. I mean, it's unbelievable. As much as I like LeBron, he has an easier job than I had as a math teacher in middle school, but look at the money difference, right? And I think parents understood it once COVID came. When they had to deal with kids every day at home, they really got a lesson in terms of what teachers have to deal with. But I think getting DC teachers from the bottom of the pole to the top of the pole in one contract in terms of salaries. I was very proud of that because I think that all of the stars lined up because she's the first. When I said to her, it's gonna cost you a lot of money, I expected some complaint from her. And she said, let's do it. It's like, whoa, where did you come from? And then we ended up doing it. DC teachers went from number 6 in that whole area to number 1. Proud of that. Proud of something else we put in there for the first time. I don't know how well, because all of this is based on the fidelity of those who are implementing, right? Like she and I completed the contract roughly in 2010. Well, Kaya was definitely committed to it, the superintendent, the chancellor that came after us. But, and even the guy that became president when I left, my vice president, he wasn't as committed to it. So even though there were things that, I think the contract gave us a roadmap for how to go, but it doesn't force every chancellor nor superintendent to buy into all of it. Because one of the things I found is that when a new leader comes in, he or she likes to put their stamp on stuff. So even when there's stuff that doesn't need to be changed, you want to tweak it a little bit to make it your own. One of the things that I think is good about this agreement is that 95% of it, even with all of that philosophy about everybody wanting to put a stamp on it, is still in the contract. So I think that's a good thing. So I think probably the most proudest thing would be to have a contract that has lasted with minimum changes for the last 15 years.
I think I am most proud of the results that we produced. I think many people, when we took this challenge on, would say it's impossible. Like what to turn around the lowest performing school district in the country with the vast majority of the student body being low-income kids, et cetera. I just think there were a lot of people out there who didn't believe that the change was possible and that it would be long-lasting, and I think it has been. So I'm very proud of that. Lots of things that I personally did wrong and poorly. I wish I could go back and change all of those things. If I had to sum it up to one thing, I really did not do a good job at all of, this goes back to the democracy question, of really sort of understanding how best to bring people along. That's everything from communication to engagement. Not that we didn't try, we never really figured it out. We were never effective in that, and that was a significant shortcoming of mine personally, and sort of the efforts overall. That I had a magic wand and could go back, I think I'd spend a lot more time on that.
So appreciate y'all's candid reflections and answering these questions. Let's give them a round of applause. We'll see you all on November the 19th. Thank you so much for being here with us.